Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I am so happy that you are here. I am so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the murder of 20-month-old Quinton Simon at the hands of his own mother, Leilani. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. All right, let's go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that is recent. Baby Quinton Simon went missing in October of 2022, and after weeks of searching for him, his remains were eventually discovered inside of a landfill. This little baby was thrown away like trash, and despite his mother's pleas for his safe return and her criticisms and issues with the community's response to his disappearance and her apparent guilt around his disappearance, she was arrested and charged and was convicted of his murder just this year. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around your brain as we go through the details of this case. But of course, I want you to answer once you have something to go on. But the question of the day is this. Do you believe that Leilani was responsible for the death of her son, Quinton? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the murder of baby Quinton Simon at the hands of his mother, Leilani. And on that note, I actually want to start this video off with a quote. This was a quote from the DA who handled this case. And this DA said of Leilani, and I quote, "Leilani Simon is not a mother. She is a monster." Our story today is going to begin with a 911 call, as many of our stories do. And this call came in on the morning of October 5th, 2022, and this was in Savannah, Georgia. This call that came in was from the boyfriend of a frantic mother who was calling to report that her 20-month-old son was missing. Okay, the man on the line, the boyfriend of this mother, said that the mom had gone to bed that night, the night before, had woke up at 9:30 in the morning and found that her child, her baby, was missing from his playpen and their front door was unlocked. She said that she believed that somebody had came into the home where 2 other adults were sleeping and 2 other children were sleeping and had just taken him. And she said she believed this because he was too small to unlock the door and open it himself. Now, one of the first red flags when it came to this case was that the first responding officer who came to the scene and spoke to Leilani, which was the mother of the missing child here, seemed different. She did not seem to be having the usual reaction to her child being missing that this officer had, they had experience in interviewing parents of missing children before. And Leilani was not acting the way most parents did when a child was missing, especially a child this small, a baby, because I cannot even imagine waking up in the morning and my child being gone. Like, the sheer panic that you go through when you lose sight of them for just a second is indescribable if you haven't felt it. But for Leilani, she didn't seem to be having that experience. Now, regardless of people being suspicious from Leilani from the start, searches immediately began with no stone being unturned. They're looking everywhere, basically. Within no time, this baby Quinton, became the community's baby, which made it all the more unbelievable and heartbreaking when very shortly after he disappeared, the police came out and made a statement where they basically said, we don't believe he's alive anymore. Before they even found him, they did not believe he was alive. And they announced pretty early on that his mother, 22-year-old Leilani Simon, was the #1 suspect they were looking at in connection with his disappearance. So, Leilani, we're going to talk about her. And I just want it to be clear. I want it to be crystal clear that I am going to tell you about Leilani because I feel like talking about who she was in the lead up here does matter when it comes to what happened to Quinton. But I don't want you to think that we're not going to be talking about Quinton, because here's the truth. Leilani doesn't matter that much to me. I don't care that much to discuss her. That may sound harsh. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be unpopular to not want to discuss her very much. But Quinton is the one who matters here to me. #1, point blank, period. And With this case, particularly like the trial and then the sentencing phase specifically, I feel like so much focus, because obviously sentencing has to do with what's going to happen to Leilani. So a lot of the focus was on her. And I felt like Quinton sort of got lost in the conversation there. So all of that is to say, don't worry, I will be talking about Quinton. I will be talking about who he was to those who knew and loved him. But I first feel like I need to tell you about the person who birthed him, raised him, and inevitably killed him. Leilani Marie Simon was born in November of 1999 to her mother, Billie Jo. And if memory serves me, she was one of 3 kids with 2 brothers. And reportedly, her upbringing was less than stable. It wasn't the most ideal thing. Her mom did have issues with substance abuse, which can historically, be disruptive. So for half of her formative years, she actually lived with her aunt while her mother worked to get clean and get a handle on her life. And it seems to have done that to some degree, because later on, she ended up actually petitioning for and getting custody of Leilani's children. So clearly her mother was doing well enough that seemed like a viable option. But prior to all of that, prior to Leilani growing up and having kids and losing kids and all the things we're going to discuss today, she was said to be a good kid, a smart kid who just happened to go down a bad path in her teenage years, a path similar to that of her mother when she too started using drugs. Now, this reportedly changed her as a person. Like, who she was fundamentally was not the same, which alienated her from the life she had before being on drugs and alienated her from the people that had been her friends for years, because they were just going down different paths now. Like, her friends were finishing school, going to college, getting their lives started, and Leilani was not. She had made a new group of friends and had a new driving force in her life, because as we have seen before, addiction can be a real ugly bitch. Now, does that mean that the horrible things that a person does while they are struggling with addiction is excusable? No, it does not. And if you've been here a while, you would know, you would have heard me say before that I do see addiction as a disease. Like, I have a lot of compassion for people who struggle in that area. There's no judgment from me on that front, but there is a limit for me on what I will see as tolerable. And the limit for me is when you hurt your kids, because a lot of people struggle with addiction and don't kill their kids. Anyways, back to Leilani. So she is using drugs, and she's also getting into her fair share of trouble here and there. She would steal things from like places that she worked. And actually, at the time that Quinton went missing, she was on probation after she got arrested for breaking into a camper and stealing, I believe it was like money. Basically, she stole a bunch of money from a coin jar that somebody had in a camper. And initially, Leilani tried to say that she wasn't even the person who did this. She was not responsible. It was actually her boyfriend at the time, who was the father of her second son. This was Quinton. Quinton's father, his name was Henry. She tried to say that he was the one who did it. But when that didn't work, because she's the one who did it, she instead was like, okay, fine, but it wasn't my fault. He influenced me and basically made me do it. And that's something that we're going to see as a running theme with Leilani, okay? Doing horrible things, doing things that are not right, and then trying to blame somebody else for her actions, either by saying they're the ones who actually did it or they're the ones who made her do it, right? And another running theme that we'll see with Leilani throughout discussing her in this case is that she had a seemingly desperate need for approval and attention from men. Growing up, Leilani was said to be popular with the boys. They liked her. She liked them. She cycled through quite a few dudes throughout her years. And eventually she went on to have 3 children with 3 different men, which I'm not judging that either. Like, do what you do as long as you're not hurting people. This is my motto in life. Do what you do as long as you're not hurting people. But, we're talking about Leilani, so we're going to get into all of the nitty gritty. So she had 3 different babies with 3 different dudes. She had her oldest son with a guy named Cody, I believe. She had her youngest child, a daughter, with a guy named Daniel. And then she had her middle child. This is 20-month-old Quinton, who we're going to be discussing today. And she had him with a guy named Henry Bubba Moss Jr., because his father was also Henry Bubba Moss, who we actually will talk a little bit about too, because there's a whole nother messed up, tragic thing that happened during this case involving Quinton's father's father, so his grandfather. But I'm jumping ahead quite a bit. Henry Bubba Moss Jr., the father of Quinton, was a guy who Leilani still wanted to be with, additional question marks, because it's like she talked bad about him, but also reportedly she told a friend that she believed if she had never had Quinton, she would still have Bubba. Now, I want to talk about Quinton. Quinton was born in Hinesville, Georgia, and was said to just be a happy baby. The type of baby who would run to you with open arms, hug your leg, or just throw himself on you to give you a kiss on the cheek. He sounded incredibly sweet, like many little boys are. He was the type of baby who would always say thank you to you. Even if he was the one doing you a little baby favor, he would say thank you to you. And he would do this thing that sounds so just precious to me. Whenever he would do something that he was proud of, he would run to the person who was closest to him and give them a little boom, which was a little fist bump. He loved the TV. His favorite shows were PJ Masks, Paw Patrol, and Dragon Tales. And he also loved TV, remotes, phones, and tablets, which are just such little baby boy things to love and is such a relatable thing for me to hear. And he was also the type of baby who loved food and was excited to try anything and everything new, which is something that I wish I could relate to with my toddler. But unfortunately, that's not my journey. He was just such a sweet little baby. You know what I mean? Like, he was a little brother who wanted to copy and do everything that his older brother did. He was full of light. He liked to dance and he liked to clap when there was music playing. And he was bright and smart and funny and loving. And he deserved to live a full life instead of being murdered by the person whose job it was to protect him. The person who was hardwired to love him so much, to want to squish his face and give him 1,000 kisses a day, and then to sit at night with your heart aching because of how much you love him while you watch him sleep. Okay, this woman committed the most inhuman act and then added insult to injury when she threw him out like trash. Fuck Leilani Simon. That may not be productive, but this case just hit a certain chord with me as a mother of a toddler boy barely older than Quinton. I don't understand this woman. I don't want to understand this woman. But moving on. Leilani Simon was Quinton's mother, and Henry Bubba Moss Jr. was Quinton's father. And at the time that Quinton went missing, Henry was 24 years old, and he lived about 85 miles away in another area in Georgia. So the two met in 2019. This was at a swimming hole, which just sounds so Georgia to me. I've never been there, but I've also never been to a swimming hole. Is that similar to a lake for those who are in that part of the world? I'm not sure, but either way, that's where they met in 2019. And shortly thereafter became pregnant. And I guess Leilani didn't tell him for like months. She was pregnant and knew and didn't tell him. And then when she was giving birth, like when she went into labor, she left for whatever reason and went to Alabama. Didn't tell him, didn't let him know, didn't let him put his name on the birth certificate, and then just came back afterwards. And despite this, the two stayed together for a short while after that, but did end up getting separated when Leilani committed a crime, breaking into a tree line, stealing a bunch of coins, and then tried to blame him for it. He was like, you know what, this relationship just isn't really working for me, and it ended. He said after the fact that Leilani was a liar and a cheater and a burnout and just liked to get high all day, every day. He also said that she was violent, particularly when she was on drugs, which was often, and she would like physically assault him during those times. And he said that she would do anything to get these drugs, even sleeping with men, to get the funds to support this habit. So it seems that he was not really a big fan of Leilani, which seems to be the general consensus for people when, you know, discussing her now, for sure. And I don't know what his relationship was with Quinton. I did read that he didn't even know for sure that he was Quinton's father until after Quinton died and like the investigation happened because the police like did a DNA test and all that jazz. But he did say that Quinton was always happy. He was always smiling. He didn't really scream, and he was just a good baby. But, you know, all of that isn't to excuse his absence in his child's life. I'll never do that. I don't excuse men who aren't present with their kids. It's just to explain like why he was so far away and why Quinton was, you know, in the custody of Leilani. Well, sort of in the custody of Leilani. But, you know, we will get there. So Leilani and her 3 kids lived in a 3-bedroom home in Savannah, Georgia with her mother, Billie Joe. The house was actually owned by Billie Joe and her husband, which was Leilani's stepdad, Thomas, and Daniel, which was Leilani's boyfriend at the time, and the father of her youngest child, her daughter, also lived in the home, as did one of Leilani's brothers, or at least he was staying in the home during the time when Quinton disappeared. I don't know if he lived there, but he was around. Now, though Leilani and Daniel were living together, reportedly they weren't super happy together. There was a lot of trouble in paradise. They weren't treating each other the best. They both did, struggle with substance abuse issues, and they were kind of just not great with each other. And on top of that, Leilani was stepping out with her drug dealer. Now, why she was doing this, it's hard to say. Again, she did like male attention, and it did also seem that she didn't feel like she was coveted by Daniel. And this is something that she brought up to him often after the whole thing was said and done. There were text messages that were released between the two of them where she wrote to Daniel saying, quote, "I want to feel like my body is worth showing off and not like it's been trashed from having 3 kids. I want to feel the way you made me feel in the beginning, like I'm treasured and safe, not like I'm just here because you really don't have a choice." She also said to him, quote, "You did not want me. I wanted you. I wanted you more than life itself." Which I will say, that's a shitty way to feel after having a kid. And I feel like there are going to be people who can relate to that, which just goes to show you. And something that I think about more and more the longer I cover these cases is that these people who commit these crimes are human, right? They do terrible things and are terrible people, but they are people. And it's just interesting to sit back and be like, I can relate to these parts of this person, but not at all to this part. So what goes so wrong? I just don't know. So since Leilani wasn't feeling appreciated and she wasn't feeling wanted, and we know from her history that male attention and validation is something that drives her, she started to look elsewhere for this validation, right? And that couldn't have helped the tension and the bad blood between the couple, right? Especially when you add that along with all of Leilani's personal issues that she had. And these personal issues that she had led her to not having legal custody of her boys. Now, I didn't see anything specific when it came to Leilani's daughter, but I did see it reported that Billy Joe had filed for custody of Leilani's boys and had won. Okay, and on top of that, she had also gotten a court order for child support that was in her favor. So basically that meant that Leilani was going to have to give Billy Joe $150 a month in child support to take care of her 2 boys, which, might I say, is not enough money, to raise 2 boys, but okay. I guess the amount that she had to pay was so low because she was considered to be a low-income individual and would therefore make a lower payment. But the payment was to continue until, quote, "one of the named children marries, dies, or emancipates." And the payments were set to begin on November 1st. Which I will say, I found the timing of this order for child support to be very interesting, considering she found out that she was going to have to pay this less than a month before Quinton went missing. Like, the payments were going to start on November 1st and he disappears October 5th. So to backtrack a little bit, I would say that the relationship between Leilani and Billy Joe seemed to be contentious. They were definitely close as a mother and daughter. I mean, Billy Joe was there for Leilani all through Quinton's disappearance and then all through her trial after she was inevitably arrested. But there had to be some tension there because, I mean, Billy Joe did have custody of her kids and they all lived together, which I don't know if you have ever lived with your parents as an adult, but I think it's pretty normal for there to be some tension there when adult children are living with their parents. Maybe that's just like from experiences I've witnessed, but that does seem to be the norm from what I've seen. Now, this tension between Leilani and her mother came to a head on September 7th, I believe it was, of 2022. And this is when the cops were called, the 911 was called, and the cops responded to the home where Leilani and her mother lived. And basically, when they got there, Leilani told them that she and her mother had gotten in a fight over the washing machine. Basically, Leilani was moving some stuff out of either the washer or the dryer so her mom could use it, and an argument started over probably who left the clothes in the washing machine when they shouldn't have. And, basically it went from let's fight about the washing machine situation to now let's make this into a giant fight about every single thing you've ever done that has annoyed me. I feel like we've probably all been in a similar argument that turns into something that it never intended to be. But basically with this argument, Leilani says that it started as like a verbal argument, and eventually her mom got pissed, shoved her into a wall, made her hurt her elbow. It was a whole thing. And she said that she had called 911 about this because her boys had been in the room when this fight had started, had seen grandma push mom, and she didn't want her children to be around that behavior, basically. Now, when Billy Joe was questioned about this, she pretty much said that everything that Leilani said was true, except for it was Leilani who started the fight and instigated the fight. And she said, like, listen, yes, I did push her into a wall. I was frustrated already, and then she screamed at me at the top of my lungs, and I lost it, and I pushed her into a wall. I would say that the things that were frustrating to Billie Joe were definitely merited reasons for a woman to be frustrated with her adult daughter. I mean, like, she literally was letting her daughter live in the house. She paid all the bills. She took care of the kids while Leilani and her boyfriend lived there and did nothing, basically. And Leilani's brother was there at the time and corroborated this, telling the cops that Leilana, my brain turned off there, that Leilani had this bad habit of stealing things and money from her mother to support her drug habit too. Now, even though Leilani was on probation at the time that the cops came to respond to this fight between her and her mother, nothing legally happened to her. But that's not to say that the situation was resolved, because it wasn't. It was bad enough that the next day, Billie Joe actually went to the courthouse and filed eviction paperwork to kick Leilani and Daniel out of her home. And just for clarity, because I saw some stuff online, she wasn't kicking them out of the house for lack of payment, because I guess Leilani had been evicted before for lack of payment. So some people were thinking that that could be the reason her mother was evicting her now. But she said no, it wasn't for lack of payment. She just wanted them out because basically Leilani was making it so that like she couldn't enjoy peacefully living in her home. And she said that Daniel and Leilani were causing damage to her property. Now, unfortunately for Billie Joe in this situation, evictions take time, man. Like, I don't know what the situation is like in Georgia, but in Los Angeles, for example, an eviction can take 3 to 4 months. And that's depending on a lot of factors, like if the tenant responds once they're served with the eviction paperwork, how they respond, whether it be an answer or a motion to quash, et cetera, et cetera. And then dependent on how they are served, like if they have to be served by mail, for example, it can take even longer. And all the while you have to live, like in her situation, she would have to live in the house with these people while she's evicting them. I have seen this play out because remember, I used to work for a law firm, and it is ugly. It can get very ugly. Ugly and stressful. So Leilani was served with the eviction paperwork right before Quinton disappeared, which would be stressful. And then you add additional stress because, okay, she was served with the eviction paperwork on September 26th. She was served with the order for child support from the court on September 28th. And then Quinton disappeared October 5th. So let's talk about that day. October 5th of that year was a Wednesday, and like most Wednesdays, almost every single Wednesday, Leilani's kids were meant to be taken over to the babysitter's house. I guess they were with her almost every day, and at this time, Billie Joe was not there because, Billie Joe had custody of the boys. Billie Joe was out of town, so the kids were with Leilani, and in the home with Leilani and her kids were just Daniel and her brother. That's all who was in the house when all of this happened. But anyways, the babysitter, on that day, the Wednesday the 5th, she received a text message at about 5:30 in the morning informing her, and this text came from Leilani's phone, informing her that she was not going to be needed. The kids weren't going to be dropped off there on that day. And she immediately thought that this was kind of strange because Leilani always dropped her kids off with the babysitter. Even if Leilani had the day off, she would still drop the kids off with the babysitter. But on this day, for whatever reason, Leilani didn't want the kids to be watched. And she actually had Daniel send that text from her phone, letting the babysitter know she wasn't needed while she laid in bed and went to sleep. And then Daniel left for work. He had a job nearby where he loaded trailers, and he left that morning at 6 a.m. Now, Daniel did initially say that he did see Quinton that morning. He said that he saw Quinton that morning in his playpen both at 3 a.m. and then at 5:30 in the morning, like when he initially spoke to police. But later, once he had, I think, here's my opinion, I don't know for sure, I think that he was covering for his girlfriend at first, not even that he knew she did something, but that he maybe... I don't know, man. I don't know why he said he saw Quinton that morning initially. I don't know. I don't believe he knew that Leilani was involved. Maybe he thought he saw him and wasn't sure because he saw him most mornings. But basically, he told the police that he did see Quinton in the playpen that morning. But later, when it came to the trial, he said that he didn't. That he said he did, but that he never saw Quinton. He never actually looked in on him, and he was mistaken. So anyways, I don't know what happened there exactly, but he says he left at 6 a.m., which he got to work. We know that he left at 6 a.m. And then Leilani says that she stayed in bed till 9 a.m. before getting up and going to check on all of her kids and finding that Quinton was missing from his playpen. And I actually have a question for mothers of more than one child about this part. Would it be normal for 3 kids to all sleep until 9 a.m., like together? That seems crazy to me. One of her babies was under 1. Like, is that normal? And if that is a normal experience for people, I am very jealous. I'll just say it. Anyways, she notices that Quinton is gone and immediately calls Daniel at work to tell him that Quinton is not in the house. And he reportedly like freaked out and immediately ran out of work. He didn't even grab his jacket. He didn't even grab his cigarettes. And he headed straight back to the house, which wasn't like a far drive, right? He worked right by the house. And when he got back to the home, he found Leilani sitting on the patio and she had not called the cops yet. The security system of the house, which was one of those systems that basically recorded every single time a door of the home was opened or closed, it showed that the door was opened at 9:20 in the morning. And then 20 minutes after that is when the cops were called to report that Quinton was missing. Now, I mentioned the security system because it is going to come into play in a couple of different ways. And one of the ways that it does, and one of the ways that it matters when we're talking about this portion of the case, we'll talk more about it later, is that, okay, that morning, Leilani wakes up. She realizes Quinton is gone. She realizes the front door is unlocked, and she immediately calls Daniel. She does not open the front door before calling Daniel, and I found that to be odd, and other people did as well, because, like, you would think, or correct me if I'm wrong, I would think that if you woke up in the morning, your kid was gone, the front door was unlocked, that you might immediately open the front door, go outside and look around a little bit. I know you think he can't open the door, but what if you're wrong? Wouldn't that be your first instinct, is to go look? I don't know, right? Like, I've never been in this situation. I have never had my child go missing, so I don't know how I would react. But also, Leilani has also not had a child just go missing with her having no idea what happened. So I guess she doesn't know what people would do either. But anyways, when police get this call, they respond to the scene and they immediately take his disappearance very seriously. Like, man, a child that small being unaccounted for is huge. So immediately searches began. And you would think, as a grieving parent, searches for your child would be exactly what you would want. It would be the number one thing you would want to happen, besides just you wanting them to just walk back up to you and you'd be able to hold them in your arms. But you know that's not a reality. So having people search for him, you would think, would be a blessing, right? But that didn't seem to be the case when it came to Leilani, because that morning when Daniel got back, realized that Quinton was gone, he immediately seemed concerned, okay? He immediately reached out to the babysitter and was like, hey, have you seen Quinton? And this babysitter, who loved this kid, in hearing that he was unaccounted for, immediately got her daughter, jumped in her truck, and drove over to Leilani's house to offer to help them search immediately. But reportedly, Leilani didn't want her to help search. And man, I can only imagine how weird that would be and how concerned she must have felt, because again, she really seemed to care about Quinton, with her own daughter saying, like, if Leilani had ever came to them and said, like, I can no longer care for him, like, I don't have it in me. This is my truth. I don't have it in me to be a mother to all of these kids all of the time. This woman would have taken Quinton in a heartbeat. There were so many people who would have taken Quinton in a heartbeat. This did not have to happen. But I am jumping ahead a little bit here, because at this point in time, when she shows up at this house, she, like everyone else, just thinks Quinton is missing. And she's heartbroken. She's like, I'm not his family, but I love him. And like, where could he be? Where would a 1-year-old even go? And I think that right there, that question is part of what made it so tense, man. This whole situation was so tense, and it was so sad, because really, where would a 1-year-old go? He probably wouldn't go many places by himself. So that left the possibility that somebody else had taken him, or that somebody else was responsible for him being gone. And that was very difficult. And it caused people to try to come up with answers to these questions and to try to fill in the gaps. And it ended up getting so ugly. Like, there was a point where, like, Billy Joe, for example, his grandma thought that maybe even the babysitter was responsible. And in hindsight, it's because Leilani had planted that information in her head. She tried to blame a lot of people, or suggest that many people could be responsible for him being missing. And there's a video out there on the internet of Billy Joe and this babysitter fighting. And it's so hard to watch because you can tell, not physically fighting, but like screaming at each other. And you can tell that like these are just two very hurt and confused women just looking for a place to direct all this hurt and this anger because you just don't know what's going on. And this anger, man, it just spread and it spread and it got bigger and it got worse. And it wasn't even just with the family or with the friends. It was with the community. It was people from outside the community. And it got worse and worse every day that Quinton was gone and that there were no answers. People were enraged and invested in this case, and within no time after he disappeared, a memorial was made right outside of his house where people would bring notes and stuffed animals and flowers, and one person even brought a plant that attracted butterflies. But the memorial wouldn't be the only thing that would show up outside of the house that Leilani had shared with her sons, because as each day went by, people got more and more angry and believed more and more wholeheartedly that Leilani or her family had something to do with what happened. So within no time, protesters and even YouTubers showed up outside of this house and passionately asked for answers, even going as far as putting signs outside of this house calling Leilani and her mother baby killers. There were two YouTubers that I know of who came to this home. It was Dolly Vision and Bullhorn Betty, who both report true crime in, let's just say, an interesting way. Not the way that I personally do it, but they do it with their own flair. And Dolly Vision, I believe, is one of the people who got arrested for protesting outside of this house. I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they were one of the people who got arrested while protesting outside of this house. Several protesters ended up getting arrested for several different reasons while standing outside of the Simon home. I guess it would be the Simon home because that's not Billy Joe's last name, but you know what I mean, outside of this home. People were literally like camped outside of this house constantly yelling at the family and banging on the windows and the doors, and the creators that were there were like live streaming this house for days in a row. It was a nightmare, with police even saying that these protests were taking, quote, precious resources away from the department, and they had to keep going out there because they had to keep going out there and like telling these people to chill out and arrest people, which was taking time away from the actual case. Now, this whole part of the case is rough because on one hand, I get it. I get the impulse to go to this house and be like, what the fuck? I do. But there's a couple things here. One, she wasn't arrested yet, right? Leilani wasn't arrested yet. And what if she wasn't responsible? Because there have been cases where people have been terrorized and it turns out that they were not responsible. So imagine being a mother of a child who was missing, that people are presuming is dead, and you're not responsible. That would be so absolutely traumatizing and cause more pain than needed. I mean, in this case, Leilani did it, so it's not the same, but it's something to keep in mind for future cases because, like, you don't know. You think you know, but you don't know. And the second thing is that police were saying that people doing this was also causing them problems and turning the case into a circus and pulling the attention away from what really mattered. And also disrupting the neighbors, which is unfortunate for people who lived there because, like, you didn't sign up for this, but now you're just stuck with this. But anyways, back to these searches for Quinton. They immediately threw all of their resources into finding this kid. And not just them. They ended up bringing in 40 FBI agents to help with the search. They got search warrants. They searched the home. They searched by the nearby neighborhoods. They drained the family pool. They searched a pond with divers and waders and like poles. They had set up a tip hotline and flew helicopters overhead, and the road that the family lived on and nearby roads were temporarily closed. They looked in dumpsters and drainage pipes, and officers did searches for over 18 to 20 hours a day, trying to just find anything that could explain what happened to this little boy and where he might be. This search was literally the most massive undertaking that this department had ever taken on. They said, ma'am, they were using every available resource to try to find out what happened to baby Quinton, and his recovery was their number one priority. They literally spent more than $500,000 on this search for this boy. And that might sound high, but it could have been even more if it wasn't for help from the community, because the community really came out here. There were people and local businesses that donated things that they may need for the searches, and also just to help like the people who are volunteering to search, the cops whose job it was to search, have their basic needs met with like food and drinks. On top of that, many businesses also donated the equipment that would eventually be used to search the landfill that they believed that baby Quinton, the little boy in the light blue Sesame Street shirt, was in. Now, why did they think that Quinton had ended up in a landfill? During their investigation of Quinton's disappearance, they found that the day that Quinton went missing, Leilani had had a bad day. And I say the day of, which would technically be the day before because he disappeared after midnight, and this is before midnight when I'm discussing, but still. Leilani had a bad day. Basically, she had a fight with her boyfriend, Daniel, so she then decided, like, F you, I'm going to go hook up with my drug dealer. So she tried to arrange a quickie for that, but was unable to, so she was in a bad mood. On top of the fact that she had had her wisdom teeth removed, so she was in some physical pain. So in order to ease the pain of her wisdom teeth and also to temper the stain of loneliness from, being turned down by these men, temper the sting of loneliness from being let down by these men, she smoked some weed, she took some coke, did some coke, and took some Percocet. Now, as I mentioned before, this house had a security system that recorded every time a door was opened or closed. So on the 5th, technically the day that Quinton went missing, because it was after midnight, at about 1:30 a.m., the back door was shown as being opened. Leilani is then seen leaving the house, getting into her vehicle, and driving away. And she goes to a nearby trailer park. It's the Azalea Mobile Home Plaza, I believe is what it is. She gets out of her car and she throws something in the dumpster. Okay. And when she's asked about this later, she says that what she was throwing out was some old, gross shrimp pasta. She then gets back in her car and she heads home. Her whole trip lasts less than 10 minutes. She comes back into the house and then she puts her head on a pillow and goes to sleep that night. So that already doesn't sound good, right? Leaving your house 1:30 in the morning, driving 2 miles away to throw something in a dumpster, that seems a little bit suspicious. But then you add the fact that after Quinton went missing, her car was searched, okay? And when they searched the back area, she didn't have a trunk, she had a hatchback. So when they searched the hatchback area, they found that there was baby rice cereal. Like, if you've had a baby, the baby rice cereal, I can't explain that further. It was sprinkled all over the back of her car in what police believe was an attempt to absorb any sort of odor that may have been there in case maybe police brought in cadaver dogs or something like that. Because you know how rice fixes all, right? You use it for sucking moisture out of your phone. Well, I guess she thought you could suck scent out of the trunk. And maybe it was successful because I haven't heard them say that they found any scent in the trunk, which isn't a trunk. Again, it was a hatchback area. Now, when police first interviewed Leilani, it definitely seems like they were trying to appeal to her, trying to lull her into a false sense of security because they're kind of nice to her. They talk to her about her brother and about Quinton and about how they treated Quinton, and then tried to give her an opportunity to admit that an accident happened, right? We see this time and time again, but we've seen this from time to time. And time again, when she's given this opportunity, she denies it. She's like, there was no accident. Nothing happened. I have no idea what happened to my son. Now, in her initial interview with police, she told them that she went to bed at midnight and woke up at 9 a.m. But we know from her being caught on camera and from the recording, like the security system recording all the openings and the closings of the door, we know that the lie detector determined that was a lie, and not in like the actual lie detector kind of way, because we are talking true crime, so you could think that, but more in the Maury Povich kind of way. Okay, they knew that she was lying because she had been on camera. And when she was confronted with these inconsistencies, she's like, okay, yes, I did leave the house, but I just went to meet up with a friend to get medicine for my pain for my wisdom teeth, basically. Now, this friend of hers that she was supposedly meeting up to get medicine from, she was going to be meeting her at a Chevron. And her name was Melissa, and she went by Missy, which is it's a weird little point here, but Leilani didn't even know her real name. She called her Misty when her name was Melissa, and she went by Missy. But that is just a little note that I thought was odd, that you wouldn't even know this friend's name that you're using as your alibi. But Police spoke to Missy, Melissa, and she's like, I never met with Leilani that night. Like, I didn't go to take her any Orajel to any Chevron station. I haven't seen that bitch in a month since she borrowed gas money from me and never returned it, was basically what she said. And they were able to confirm this, police, by looking at the surveillance video from Chevron and seeing that Leilani was never there, nor was Melissa/Missy. So again, Leilani changes her story, and this time she says that she owed her drug dealer $20, so she was going out that night to settle that debt. So Leilani changes her story again, and this time she says that she actually never did leave the house. It wasn't her. It was Daniel who left the house that night. But police had already determined that they did not believe that Daniel or her brother were responsible at all. They were able to tell from the use of their cell phones that they were both likely asleep when this happened, because Leilani's phone was the only one that was active and doing anything. And on top of that, Daniel ended up working with police. Later, when the heat got to be too much for them, they left the home that they had been sharing with Billy Joe, and they went and they stayed in a hotel. And Daniel let the police come and bug this hotel so that they could try to get information from Leilani. And in doing this, they actually got her on camera admitting that she lied to police and that it was she, not he, who left the house that night. But again, this is just something that she did, right? She would do something terrible and then try to blame somebody else for this happening because she just couldn't take accountability, right? It wasn't her. It was Bubba or Daniel. It wasn't her. It was the babysitter or some stranger, someone whose vehicle she saw in the neighborhood that day. And anytime you would sort of question her inconsistency and be like, that doesn't make sense, she would just start crying and go into hysterics. And then, eventually when nothing else was working, she just started to say that she didn't remember anything. She said that when she would use cocaine, she would black out. It would be like the lights were on, but nobody was home. And then she told police that she was never going to use cocaine again because it made her angry and it made her impulsive. And we know she was using cocaine the night that Quinton went missing because she admitted that she was using it. And she said that after using it, she believes she used that as an excuse as to why she didn't remember anything. She said she just remembers seeing Quinton's face and then blacking out. Now, police were not as soft with Leilani as time went by. They told her, we know you hurt your child. And by the end, after she had been interviewed so many times, she didn't even deny it anymore. Even though in the beginning, she wholeheartedly denied any involvement in what happened to her child. While he was missing, she literally did an interview with her mother where she said, she's not running away. And then she said something that I found to be incredibly strange in her situation, especially if she was trying to look innocent. And she said that if anything came up that proved that she did it, she would come in and turn herself in. And I don't know about you, but if I was innocent, that's not a thing I would ever say. That's not even a thing that would pop into my brain. But it did pop into hers, even though she was sitting here saying that she wasn't involved at all. She was saying that she was in limbo just like anyone else, just like everyone else, and that she too just wanted answers. And she said during this interview specifically, and I quote, "We want him back in our arms holding us. That's what we want. We're just hoping that he's in somebody's house and they're feeding him, and maybe they wanted a baby and couldn't have a baby. Maybe they thought they were his savior. That's our best hope at this point." She then said to her son, "I love you, baby Q, my little monkey," and said she just wanted him home. Which, the nerve. The nerve sometimes, man. The nerve. Now, even though she was sitting here pleading for her son's safe return, at this time, police already had their sights on her. It's not to say they didn't look into anybody else, because they did. They did look into other suspects. They did interview other people. They did take a good look at his biological father, Henry Bubba Moss Jr., right? They looked at him, but they were able to rule him out pretty quickly, even though Leilani did try to say that he was responsible, did try to say that he was the one who came into the house and took their son in the middle of the night. She did try to put that on him. This poor guy too, dude. I can't imagine what he would go through with something like this, right? To lose your child and to realize that that's it. That you had gone months without seeing him, that you didn't get to have the relationship that you could have had because you thought you had more time, right? You didn't expect something like this to happen. And now to know that the time that you had, that's all that you got. And to think about all the time that you weren't there and wish that you had been. And then to find out that the person who police are looking at as being responsible for something like this is the child's own mother, like the person that you were intimate with. I cannot imagine what that feels like. He actually went to Savannah once he learned that Quinton was missing. He went there and he was surprised to see how Leilani was, because she wasn't grieving like he would imagine she would be. She was high and she was drunk and she was laughing and she was having fun. She wasn't crying at all. He said that she's an evil person, a terrible person, and he said that she needs to go to jail or hell, and added that if she didn't want Quinton, she could have just told him and he would have taken him. And it just seems like this was something that everybody felt and that everybody kind of immediately knew. It wasn't just the police. Everybody sort of immediately knew that Leilani had something to do with this, because even her own mother, Billie Jo, there was a DM that was leaked that she had sent after Quinton went missing and after police announced that they believed that he was dead. Basically, Billie Jo messaged somebody and said that Quinton was dead, that Leilani had done it, and that she had put him in a landfill and had no memory of doing it. On top of that, Billie Jo also gave an interview in the early days when Quinton first went missing. And during this interview, she was crying and she said, like, usually my daughter is a good kid, but sometimes she does things wrong and I don't even know what to think. She added that, like, you just don't expect something like this to happen, and then said she didn't know if she could trust her daughter. And this is while talking about your missing grandson. And she said that out loud to a reporter. She basically said that she just knows she's hurting and just wanted Quinton home. And her stepdad, Thomas, also felt like things were weird. He said that Leilani's story just didn't add up. And he said specifically, quote, "She's lied to us before so many times. I don't know. It's bad to say, but she likes to lie." And dude, these are things her family is saying right when Quinton goes missing, before his body is even found. Like, these are their first instincts. And I think that is incredibly telling. Her own mom, her stepdad, Quinton's father, her former partner, they all suspect that she is responsible. And I cannot imagine what that feels like to have him missing and then to feel this. I cannot imagine that pain. And then side quest, but speaking about pain, I want to talk about Henry Bubba Moss Jr., Quinton's biological father. This man went through so much pain all at the same time, because when Quinton first went missing before he was found, his mother died. Now, how she died hasn't been clarified, but then, okay, his son goes missing, his mom died. And then in November, when Quinton was still missing before he had been found, his father, Henry Bubba Moss Sr., the man he was named after, he too died when he was killed in a hit and run. So this guy literally lost his son, his mother, and his father all at the same time. And his parents both die while his kid is still missing. I guess they basically just think that his dad got a flat tire and he was walking along the interstate near his home, heading back to his house when somebody hit him and just took off. So he had been through a lot. And then the same week that his father died, the police came out and announced that they no longer believed that Quinton was alive. They said that based on their interviews and the searches that they had conducted, they believed that he was deceased. And they said that their hearts broke along with the communities at trying to comprehend how something like this could happen. And then they announced that Leilani Simon was their sole suspect. They literally believed that Leilani Simon had somehow killed her son and had taken his body and had put it in the dumpster like trash. To say I hate it here is the understatement of all understatements. But moving forward, 2 weeks after Quinton went missing, police announced that they were going to start looking in this landfill. And this landfill was the landfill that the trash that had been taken from the mobile home park where Leilani had gone to throw away her old shrimp pasta, they were going to the landfill that this trash would have been taken to, and the specific area that this trash would have been taken to, because apparently landfills have some sort of organization system so you know which area to search in, which I didn't know. I thought it was just like, it's all dumped together, good luck. But no, they're in certain areas. So they start to look in the certain area that this trash would have been taken to. And this was information that was given to Leilani, okay? Before she's arrested, they suspect her. They really suspect her, but they haven't arrested her. And they tell her, like, hey, we're looking for your toddler in a landfill. And she has no reaction. There's no shock. There's no disgust at the fact that they think he's dead and that they think he would be thrown out like trash. Nothing. Now, Billy Joe, when they tell her, she responds with shock and with horror, the way you would expect an innocent, normal person to react when learning that somebody you loved had been put into the trash. Right now, Billy Joe and normal, that's an iffy. I don't know how I feel about that. We'll get into that a little bit later. I have my thoughts about her, but I'm not going to get too far into it because I don't think it's super productive, but we'll talk a little bit more about it when it gets to like the things that she did that I thought were strange. But when it came to learning that he was believed to be dead and would be found in a landfill, she reacted in a way that I believe is appropriate for somebody who wasn't responsible, unlike his mother. Now, searchers sifted through 1.2 million of pounds of trash for more than a month before coming up with human bones on November 18th, which is incredibly lucky. Not lucky. It's not lucky to be in this situation, but it's lucky that they found him because according to the FBI, landfill searches are only successful like 5% of the time. So it's lucky, but it's also horrible because the first bone that they found in this landfill was a piece of this baby's skull. So these people had been out there searching, going through the physical, mental, and emotional anguish of knowing that you're out there searching for the body of a baby. And then after all these weeks to find pieces of him, and that the piece you find is a piece of his skull that was small enough to fit in the palm of a woman's hand. This is something that the officer later, like the first responding officer, testified about and like broke down a little bit when talking about because it was heartbreaking. Like, how could you find that and then just go on normally with your life after holding something like that in your hand? And then all of these people have to know, like, okay, it was a possibility before, but now this is a reality. And we have to carefully look for all of these tiny children-sized bones. This, I'm sure you can imagine, was very traumatizing. It was traumatizing for those who had searched for him, for those who had found him, for those who worked in the landfill. Several people needed therapy after having to experience this. And the people who worked in this landfill specifically, can you even imagine how traumatizing is I can't think of a better word. There aren't words in the English language for how fucking awful this is. That's what it comes down to, because these people have to continue going into work knowing that something like this happened there, and then knowing that parts of him are still out there and will always be out there because there's no way you're going to recover every bone of this baby. So you're just at work knowing that there's skeletal remains of a toddler out there. I'm not going to cry. I will not. I shall not. I want to. But it's just, they were so affected by it that they actually built him a memorial at the landfill that included like a marker for him and like his photo and everything, because they had more love and respect and honor for him than his own mother did. This whole situation just makes me so, so mad. It makes me want to cry to just picture this baby laying out there for weeks in trash because of his fucking egg donor. Someone who's meant to love him more than anything. Like, what happened here should never happen to anyone, let alone to a child by their protector. It just seemed like there were so many people out there who cared for this boy, who cared for Quinton more than his mother did. Like his babysitter, for example, who on the day that his remains were recovered, held a candlelight vigil in his honor, which I can only imagine was an incredibly solemn experience. Now, because of the decomposition to Quinton's body, because he had been out there for about a month, and the just damage his remains sustained from the heavy machinery that was being used to look for him, and the fact that his remains were described as strewn over the length of a football field, not to a football field, I can't even speak, not to mention the pure weight of the garbage that was on and around him. They were unable to determine exactly how he was killed. They were able to run tests, though, and find that there were no drugs in his system, which was something that people had considered, that because, Leilani used drugs, that maybe there was something down that he had access to that he could have accidentally taken and, died in that way. They were able to rule that out at least. Now, speaking of these drugs, actually, because I didn't mention this yet, but a few weeks before Quinton's remains were recovered, Leilani did actually put herself into a rehab center that she was kicked out of because she was fraternizing with the male guests, because she can't keep it in her fucking pants, apparently. And so she was kicked out. And after she was kicked out of this treatment center, her mother went and picked her up. She took her to get her last free meal before, on November 21st, 2022, she drove her daughter to the FBI headquarters where the police were waiting for her. And Leilani Simon was finally arrested, okay? And she was charged with 1 count of malice murder, 2 counts of felony murder, 1 count of concealing the death of another, 1 count of making a false report, and 14 counts of making a false statement, and she was held without bond, and she pled not guilty to all of her crimes. Now, this arrest, the day that she was arrested, was actually a week before these remains were even positively identified as belonging to Quinton. They were just so sure it was him, because, everything pointed to it being him, that they wasted no time and they took her into custody. And I don't know how common that is. I don't know how common it is for somebody to be arrested for the murder of somebody when the body hasn't even been identified as being this person and there's no cause of death because of how decomposed the body was. I don't know how common that was, but the police were basically so sure. I'm sure they were also fucking pissed, let's be honest, but they were so sure. They were like, listen, a baby can only die in so many ways, right? And the picture painted here, without evidence of any medical event, no signs of drugs in Quinton's system, and the fact that Leilani was asked several times when questioned if there was an accident, to try to give her an out and get her talking, and time again, she denied it. All of that pointed to his death being caused by murder. And that was so upsetting to hear. That was so upsetting for so many people to hear, because I think people could rationalize an accident. They wouldn't accept it and they wouldn't forgive it, but I think they could rationalize it because things happened that shouldn't happen. Parenting is hard. People snap. It's not okay. I'm not excusing it. I'm explaining it. Definitely not excusing it, because I would never. You know what I mean? But I think that people could have dealt with that in their minds if she hadn't thrown him in the trash. You know what I mean? Because that right there shows no regard for him. That shows regard for yourself. You did something. You don't want to get caught. You're willing to go this far to cover it up, right? So, in hearing this and hearing that it was murder, it wasn't an accident. And then knowing that she did this, it was so beyond what people could rationalize and comprehend. And Hadley, who was, at least in my estimation, the face of this investigation, he was, I believe, the chief of police. I might be wrong on that. Head honcho in the police department in Savannah. He made a statement. He had to compose himself when he made the statement during a press conference when he said, quote, "You have a lot of emotions, just as a general human being, as a person who has children. You see the impact that has on people. So if you step back and take a moment to kind of absorb that, if you didn't have any feelings about that, you might want to ask yourself a few questions." Which, I totally agree with, because you would have to have a different kind of brain for it not to be maddening for a mother to kill her kid and then not to give a fuck about it afterwards, because I didn't even mention this yet. But during the time that Quinton was missing, okay, let me reposition and get comfortable here. My back hurts. Literally 2 weeks after Quinton went missing, before his body was found, his mother Leilani was seen at a bar. It's called Stingrays, I think. She's at this bar / restaurant / place where there is alcohol. And she's there with her mother, Billy Joe, and she's just getting drunk. She's just laughing. She's flirting with the staff. She's having a great time. While people are in a landfill searching for her child. And dude, like, people there were interviewed. People who saw them were interviewed, and they said, like, she was there. She was taking shots of the tequila, cheersing with people, and flirting with dudes. And I will say that that is a weird thing for an innocent mother to do while there are people out there searching for your child in a landfill. I would also say that that's a weird thing for an innocent grandmother to do. Okay, and that's one of those things that made me just like look strangely at Billie Jo. Because remember, I told you I have some opinions on her. I find that to be strange. Not that I think she was involved, because I do not think she was involved. But there's like supporting your daughter, and then there's this. But either way, Leilani did this. She was questioned about it. She denied it. She said, no, she wasn't drinking. She wasn't getting drunk. That's crazy. But they interviewed not only customers that were there, but employees that were there. And they said, yes, she was. And she was being very inappropriate. And even though all of this was true, all of this was omitted at trial, which I don't know how I feel about. But with that said, let's start talking about the trial and the legal aspect of this case. While awaiting trial, Leilani wrote a letter to the court where she pled her case, I guess. She said that there was no factual evidence against her, that everything was circumstantial, and that the state was missing some vital pieces like DNA evidence, any forensic evidence, any eyewitnesses, and a murder weapon. Also, there was no video surveillance. There was no time of death to confirm she was even around when he died. There was no cause of death and no proof of abuse to either Quinton or any of her kids. She said that she knows people are skeptical, but that there are no facts, and instead police focused so heavily on her and missed any evidence that would point them in the direction of her child's actual killer. And this is something that, of course, her attorneys tried to argue as well, which was their best argument. They tried to have the indictment against Leilani thrown out, like before we even got to the trial and all that, because they said, like, there is no proof of how Quinton even died. So how can you indict her on his murder? And this was arguably the biggest hurdle that the prosecution was going to have to jump over. But they said that they believed that they had enough. They said that even without the cause of death, they believed that they could prove without a reasonable doubt that Leilani was responsible for his death. Before the trial began, the defense also tried to make it so there would be no media present in the courtroom. They were like, you can do transcripts and all that, but we don't want it like recorded on video for people to watch. And strangely enough, the prosecution also agreed with this, say that they wanted to protect the anonymity, or like they wanted to protect the other siblings basically by not having this broadcasted. And I didn't see any reports of how the judge ruled, but I mean, I did watch the trial on court TV, so it's safe to say that the judge disagreed, which I thought it'd be interesting that the judge would disagree when both the prosecution and the defense agreed on this. But we were able to watch it. I mean, I don't know if you did, but I did. And so here we find ourselves with me. I watched all the things so that you don't have to. So the trial began in October of 2024, just about, where are we now? About a month ago now, right? Yeah, because I'm uploading this the Monday after Thanksgiving. And it started again, October of 2024, and the prosecution took 2 hours laying out their case and their opening statement of why they believed that they had the proof that Leilani Simon had murdered her child. And the defense took just 3 minutes to say that the prosecution's case was basically all speculation and rumor, and that there was no hard evidence to prove that Leilani did anything. The prosecution told the court that they would not be able to tell them how Quinton Simon was killed because his mother had taken such great lengths to cover it up and make that impossible. She did everything in her power to make it so that he would never be found, and he was found by, I would say luck, but 5%, that seems more than luck. That seems like, if you believe in divine intervention, it could be just that. They then said that they did not have to prove exactly how Leilani Simon killed her son. They just had to prove that she did. And they said that it was a fact that Leilani Simon had murdered her son Quinton. The whole time they did their opening statement, there was a photo of Quinton, of his little, he was so cute. He was just so cute, of his little baby face there for everybody to look at, to put a face with all of these horrible things that they were saying happened to him. The defense countered by saying that stating that Leilani Simon had killed her son was a bold conclusion considering the lack of evidence. And then the defense said specifically, and I quote, "This case can't be decided by emotion. It has to be decided based on facts and evidence provided in this courtroom. Throughout the trial, the defense said that there was no evidence that Leilani Simon had killed her child, that there was not even proof of how he died. He could have died in a variety of ways. It could have been an accident, or it could have been some medical issue with him that they didn't know that he had. They even pointed out that his room smelled overwhelmingly like vomit when the house was searched, and pointed out that there were previous health issues with Quinton on record. There were 2 doctors that testified at trial, one being Quinton's pediatrician that said during his last visit he was happy and healthy, but did notice that she heard a heart murmur and referred him to a pediatric cardiologist. And the pediatric cardiologist also testified and said that he did evaluate Quinton and found 2 issues. One of them was common, and one was a rare coronary fistula, which, if you don't know what that is, it is a, quote, rare abnormal connection between a coronary artery and another blood vessel or heart chamber. Which, when I read that, I was like, that sounds serious to me. Anything with the heart sounds serious to me, but according to the pediatric cardiologist, this is like, though rare, it's a minor health issue, and though anything is possible, he has never seen or heard of it to cause death. So basically, what the defense was getting at is that it is possible, it is reasonable that it is possible that Quinton died of something else, that he died of a medical situation, or he died of an accident, anything other than murder. Even though Leilani was asked time and time again and given all the opportunities to admit that that's what took place, and she denied it every single time. But the defense said, like, if that was the case, if she did dispose of him after he died from an accident or after he died from a medical emergency, she would be guilty of like a lesser charge, not murder. And the prosecution disagreed, saying that though the case was circumstantial, it was overwhelming. Now, the prosecution, in addition to telling you all the things that I've already told you, they painted a pretty good picture of a motive for Leilani, which a motive is also not necessary for, like, it's not in your burden of proof. You don't have to prove a motive, but I think in the absence of, a cause of death, proving the motive is what they had that was strongest to appeal to people and let them understand why they believe that this happened. And they basically told the court that Leilani treated Quinton differently than she treated her other children, and not in a good way. Despite Quinton being a loving little boy, Leilani didn't seem to like him very much. And she had even told the babysitter who watched them that she preferred his older brother, that she had never bonded with Quinton, and that she did not love him at all. And the question of why. Why did she not like him? Why did she not bond with him? Why did she not love him? That's something that we'll probably never know the full answer to. It's probably a variety of things. I don't think there's just like one reason that could make something so unnatural be true. But one thing that gave some insight into what part of that could be is that Leilani had made Google searches, and this was before Quinton was dead, and she had searched, like, is it normal for a mother not to bond with her child because of the relationship with the father? Both Quinton's regular babysitter and a teenager who had babysat for Leilani in the past testified at trial and gave stories of instances where Leilani was abusive to Quinton specifically. To give some examples, on one occasion, Leilani reportedly pushed Quinton in the pool without his floaties on, even though the babysitter had wanted to put the floaties on. And Quinton, who could not swim because he was 20 months old and had not learned, sunk to the bottom and had to be gotten out of the pool and was coughing and crying. And in response to this, Leilani said she didn't care. She said her older son was able to learn how to swim, so Quinton needed to be as smart as him and learn to swim too. Which is so infuriating because, like, water and babies is so dangerous. Not to say that babies shouldn't be in water, but, like, you need to be on top of your kid and watching them because things can go wrong so quickly. And this bitch didn't care. There was another occasion where Quinton needed some help down the stairs, and Leilani refused to help him, so he fell down the stairs. And of course, he cried because he was hurt and he was scared, and Leilani ignored him and let the babysitter run to his aid, and she did nothing. In another instance, Quinton and his brother had gotten out of the house without anybody noticing, and they had run to the road and were playing in the road by themselves, where they were found by the babysitter. So the babysitter takes the boys back to the house, tells Leilani what happened, and Leilani backhands Quinton in the face hard enough that he falls backwards and he hits his head on the concrete. The way I would like to backhand this woman in the face, my God. I'm not a violent person at all. I don't hit people. I would hit this person. Probably. I'd like to, in my mind. But moving on. The prosecution in their closing statements basically said, they talked about Leilani's need and craving for male attention. I mean, this girl even continued to go on with this while she was in jail. She carried on several relationships with men over letters and video chat. One of them, she even referred to as like the love of her life for her husband or something, and he was a convicted child M-word, did horrible things. A big old P-word, you know what I'm talking about? And she just really seemed to enjoy the male attention she was getting even after being arrested. But anyways, I got kind of sidetracked there. Basically, what the prosecution was saying is that the night that Quinton was killed, Leilani had gotten in a fight with Daniel, so she had lost that affection. She had then reached out to her drug dealer to try to get some attention there and was unsuccessful. So she did something drastic. They said that she killed her son. And, quote, in the act of killing Quinton, she became a sympathetic person and got Danny's attention back. She became the mother of a missing child. They then said specifically, and I quote, she killed him, her own son, got in the car with his body, drove to a dumpster, and threw him away like a piece of trash. And then they added that Leilani Simon is not a mother. She is a monster. Leilani's attorney closed by saying that people, again, needed to not be ruled by their emotions, which I think it could definitely be argued that it would be very difficult for that not to take place. Though the jury does say that that didn't take place, but I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if I care, but I'm sure that emotion played a part in this, because how could it not? Because these are normal people. That's the thing what people need to remember about juries is it's just a group of normal people, and normal people are going to be ruled by their emotions sometimes, and it's really hard not to when a kid's involved. But this is what her attorney asked, that they not be ruled by emotion, and then added that Leilani's sexual history, her relationships, had nothing to do with the case, and reiterated that there was no proof that Leilani Simon had killed her child. And as for Leilani herself, she never testified. On October 25th, 2024, after a 10-day trial and just an hour of deliberations, the jury had come back with their verdict. And they had found Leilani Simon to be guilty of all of the 19 charges that were against her. And this was despite the fact that the jury disagreed with the prosecution calling her a monster. They said that they saw her as an emotionally fragile mother who took drugs and lost control, and then did what she felt she had to do to cover it up after the fact, and said that they believed that she couldn't fully come to terms with what she had done to her own child, which is why she could act so casually after the fact. But despite that, they believed that she had done it, and she was found guilty for it. And this guilty verdict is like the only time through the entire trial that Leilani Simon seemed to get emotional. Not when they showed pictures of her baby's broken body. She didn't respond then. Just when she found out that she was guilty and she came to the realization that she was facing life in prison with no possibility of parole. Like, that was the max that she could get, and she was like, fuck. It really just seemed to the public that Leilani was very calculating and manipulative, but not particularly smart, and that she had really underestimated just how strong the reaction would be from the community at large for a missing toddler. Like, she truly underestimated how Quinton would just be wrapped up and made the county's child. And again, Hadley, the police chief, said that it was fitting that the jury from their community delivered the final measure of justice for baby Quinton. So with that, Leilani Simon was sentenced for her crimes on November 21st, 2024, which was 2 years to the day after her arrest. Several people spoke during Leilani's sentencing hearing. There were a lot of people for Leilani, but there were a lot of people for the state. Well, there were people for the state, not many. There was a investigator, this woman who worked on the case, who absolutely destroyed the image of Leilani, in my opinion, it was very much like the Casey Anthony thing, where she basically told them all about Leilani's partying that she was doing while other people were looking for her child's body in a landfill. You know, the stingrays thing, because this couldn't be presented at trial, but she was able to talk about it at the sentencing. The daughter of Quinton's babysitter also spoke, and it was very sad because she was young, you know, and she talked about what a tremendous loss Quinton was, about how much she loved him because, I mean, he was with her all the time. He was at the house all the time. She said she played with him and she woke up with him and she saw him as like her little brother, and she knew that like her family would have taken care of him, and to see that this happened to him when it didn't have to was so horrifying. And another thing that's just so terrible here is that it was the babysitter's daughter, who spoke for Quinton at this hearing, because most of his own family, if not all of his own family, spoke for Leilani, not for him. Leilani's brother testified about what a good sister she was, his big sister, and he said that though he believes she should spend some time in jail for what she did, he doesn't think it should be without parole because she should have the opportunity to have a life after this, which Quinton doesn't get to, but okay. When her stepfather testified, it was very sad. And I watched the sentencing on like a live stream so that you could also see people commenting and talking about the case. Because I'm always curious. I don't do that very often, but I will probably do it more often because I found it interesting to see people's reaction. Because with his testimony specifically, the people's reaction to him kind of irked me. And I do feel like I'm in the minority just based on the comment section that I was watching happen. But I found that people were very harsh at him. Like while he's sitting there and he's getting emotional and he's crying and he's talking about why he believes that Leilani should be able to get parole one day, people were very like, they attacked him quite a bit. They called him an enabler, which arguably could be true. But I think what people fail to remember, and again, I might be in the minority here. Some people might know and just not care, and that's fair too. Everybody can have their opinion, but this is where mine, I think, differs. Maybe you'll agree with me. Maybe you won't. It's okay if you don't. It's not that deep with this. But I think people sometimes don't acknowledge that when somebody is a killer, like Leilani in this situation, that doesn't mean that they cease to be a person prior, right? There are people out there who care about them and who love them too. That doesn't just end when somebody does something terrible and gets arrested. It gets messy and it gets complicated. And though and I'm with you here, we want to be like, fuck her, put her in jail, throw away the key, that's it. It's not as easy for people who love her and have loved her for years to just flip a switch like that. And in his statement, he made a point to say that like nobody truly knows what happened. And I think that plays a part in this as well, because this is a circumstantial case, right? There's no indisputable evidence. There's no photo. There's no video of her doing this thing. Nobody saw her do something specifically to Quinton, like maliciously and with intent and with rage. Like nobody saw that. So there's nothing that they can look at that they can't refute. They may feel in their heart, because they're people who have brains, they may look at this and be like, she did it. She was responsible. But they can also, what's the word I'm looking for? They can also have plausible deniability in what exactly she did, because there is no exact proof of what she did. And that gives them the opportunity to hold on to the person they were to you and grieve that. Does all of that make sense? Now, don't get me wrong. I did digress a little bit here, but I have no problem saying, fuck this chick. But when it comes to that, it's like, am I alone here? Am I all by myself? Am I in another universe? Throw the damn ball. I just think people really just saw her family as enabling instead of, which, you know, is fair. So let's just move on. Anyways, people in her family that spoke for her just basically talked about what a good person she was, how she was so loving and helpful and smart growing up, but that drugs destroyed her and made her someone else, essentially. They said that as a mother, they never saw her as anything other than loving, and they also blamed the drugs for what happened. And her aunt even implied again that Daniel could have been responsible, but only Leilani was arrested. And it's like, bro, the police determined Daniel wasn't involved. They even had a bug in the freaking hotel room, and she herself admitted that Daniel wasn't involved and that she had lied. Like, all of that is true. And honestly, if I was Daniel, dude, I would be so pissed. to be accused and wrapped up in this, like constantly, because there are going to be people who are like, but Daniel though, like forever, and that's just how it is. When her mother, Billie Jo, testified on her behalf, she was asked, because she had trouble just giving a statement, so she was mostly asked questions, and she was asked, like, do you think your daughter is too far gone to be saved, or do you think that she should be offered the opportunity for parole one day? And Billie Jo said that she does not believe her daughter is so far gone because she herself was not too far gone to be saved, and she too struggled from addiction. To which I say, Billie Jo, you never killed any of your kids. You instead, your kids left. Your kids were taken care of by somebody else to give you the opportunity to get clean and to be okay and to have the opportunity to be a better mother with your kids still there. But in this situation, Leilani killed her son. So that I'm sorry, that opportunity should be gone. I don't think she should get the opportunity to try to mother her other kids when she couldn't even keep one alive. I'm sorry. That's how I feel. And another reason, let me tell you why. Another thing is that Leilani, I noticed this when it came to the sentencing hearing. This girl only cries for herself. She only cares for herself. Like, let's say there is a situation where this was an accident, where this didn't mean to happen. You would think you would be a fucking disaster. If you accidentally killed your kid, threw him in the trash, how could you wake up every day and exist? How could you? I wouldn't do it, but I would imagine a person would be a fucking disaster, crying constantly. I would not want to live. I wouldn't want to exist. But she only cries for herself. She cries when people talk to her, when they stand up for her, when they defend her. But she doesn't cry for Quinton. She doesn't cry when people talk about Quinton or love Quinton or miss Quinton. And she did not speak for herself at her sentencing hearing either. Now, the defense was asking that Leilani Simon be given life in prison with the possibility of parole because that is the least harsh sentence that she could get. And from what I understand, in Georgia, if you are sentenced to that, you have to serve 30 years prior to being up for parole. So that would mean that she'd be like in her 60s or 70s before she would even have the opportunity to be released. Now, the prosecution was asking for life in prison with no possibility of parole, plus 65 years, plus a fine of, I believe it was $117,000, which was like the max fine that they could ask for. And this was so that they could recoup the hundreds of thousands of dollars they had spent looking for Quinton, not to mention the cost of this trial. They said, listen, she didn't like Quinton. She never did. It wasn't the drugs. It was just her. The prosecutor then said she did a wicked thing and needed to take responsibility for it. He then pointed out that she tried to cover it up. She tried to blame other people without caring that you're blaming other people for murder. And then she had no remorse. Instead, she went out, got drunk, partied, flirted, and just didn't care. And they added that she didn't seem sorry. She just seemed sorry that she got caught. He then added that the court needed retribution for Quinton, that she needed the harshest punishment because what she did was so horrible, and then pointed out that most people, or not most people, many people find retribution to be the least moral reason for punishment, essentially. He said that there are many academics and legal philosophers that continue to make arguments for retribution. He specifically stated in an article that was written by a legal academic who you may recognize, a man named Dan Markle, who was tragically murdered, which is a case I did not cover, but my friend Kimber covered it on her channel Dark Livity if you want to learn more. They're incredibly informative over there. But basically, Dan Markle wrote an article about retributive punishment, and he wrote that it has both a communicative function and an expressive function. He stated that in Dan's article, he wrote that by giving someone a retributive punishment, saying that you will be in jail this long because what you did merits it and you deserve it, communicates the seriousness of what the person did and the community's lack of acceptance for it. He said it also expresses to society basically like how the court is going to respond to something like this, so it helps to be sort of a deterrent. He added that by giving Leilani the harshest punishment, it sends a message to both the community and to Leilani herself. And he said that Leilani needs that message because she doesn't get it. She doesn't understand how serious what she did is. And the only way she's ever going to is by giving her the harshest punishment. He said the court also needs to give Leilani the harshest sentence to show the community, the people who loved Quinton and missed Quinton and searched for Quinton and wrapped him up in their arms and in their thoughts and their prayers and gave up so much of their lives and their time and their energy for him. He said that the court needs to express to these people that their intuition on what a punishment should be for a mother who does something like this to their child and then acts the way they did after the fact is actually right. They believe that she should have the harshest punishment, therefore she should. With that, the judge was going to sentence Leilani Simon for her crimes. But before doing so, the judge addressed the court where she said, and I quote, "Clearly, little Quinton, in life and in death, impacted many, many individuals, but also the community at large." She then sentenced Leilani Marie Simon to life in prison with the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 consecutive years. And she ended the sentencing hearing by addressing the courtroom and saying that she hopes that one day there will be peace somehow. And with that, my friends, is the story of the murder of baby Quinton Simon. I hope that you found my telling to be informative. I hope I gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Quinton with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day. I had one, I now think I have three. And the questions of the day are as follows. 1. Do you believe that Leilani Simon is responsible for the murder of her child, for the death of her child? 2, do you think it was an accident or intentional? And 3, do you think she should have ever had the opportunity for parole? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below because I am curious to hear what you think. Now, before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, but whenever you leave me a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it. So if I do cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage. And I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brad Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brad Pack and become one of us. One of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. And now with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video.